Welcome to the Katalis Podcast. I'm your host, Sondang Sirait, Communications Advisor with Katalis.
Katalis is a unique 5-year government-backed business development program that unlocks the vast potential of economic partnerships between Australia and Indonesia.
Indonesia's target to meet net zero emissions by 2060 is calling for an increase in the share of renewables in the country's energy mix. Discussions with various international partners are intensifying, all directed towards working together to achieve this end. Increasing alignment between Indonesia and Australia, for one, has led to the recent Australia-Indonesia Joint Statement on the green economy and energy transition. In this episode of the Katalis Podcast, we'll explore opportunities to enhance cooperation between Indonesia and Australia to achieve an inclusive and resilient renewable energy supply chain, create sustainable jobs, and drive green investment. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to join in the conversation on social media and our website at IA-CEPA-Katalis.org.
So on the target 2030, we ensure that universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services. We increase substantially the share of renewables in the energy global mix. We promoting the energy efficiency, strengthen the international cooperations, and also to expand infrastructure and improve technology. This is kind of our target in 2030.
That was Satya Widyayuda, member of Indonesia's National Energy Council, reiterating the country's commitment to embrace clean energy transition. The National Energy Council is Indonesia's main body responsible for cross-sector energy issues and for overseeing the implementation of national energy targets across different line ministries. Just how Indonesia will turn plan into action, where the progress takes it so far, and what challenges remain. We'll be speaking with Adhityani Putri, Executive Director of Yayasan Indonesia Cerah, a policy research and strategic communications hub on clean energy. Thank you, Adhityani, for joining the Katalis Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this podcast.
So this is an exciting time we're living in. Everyone's talking about the green economy and energy transition. Companies are pouring money into environmental, social, and governance practices. They're establishing net zero goals. What do you make of this trend and where is it going?
First and foremost, I hope it doesn't just stay a trend. I hope that this is going to be the way forward. This is where we need to be heading if we want to ensure a safe and stable climate for us, for our children, for all of our future generations. Companies, businesses, governments have to change the way they operate, have to change their trajectories in order to ensure that this is to happen. Net zero goal is a marker that can be verified scientifically, a marker that is both quantifiable and has measurements built into it that everyone can strive towards, regardless of what entities there are, whether they are governments or whether they are businesses. So this is a great development. The next step, what we need to be doing is to ensure that everyone will be pledging towards this goal and that everyone is taking the right steps towards net zero so that these don't just become empty pledges.
If we look at the global trend, fossil fuel demand is slowing down, and at the same time, the cost for renewable energy is also declining. How is that global scene affecting businesses in Indonesia?
Well, certainly this global development is creating a lot of excitement about renewable energy technology, and therefore has sparked this big attention to diversify into this new field, into renewable energy. We are seeing, for example, the big coal miners of Indonesia putting out statements, and also, I believe, are starting to formulate strategies to diversify into renewable energy, realizing that, their days in fossil fuel mining, processing, and production is probably numbered, right? We're talking about Indica Energy, for example, that has set a net zero target by 2050. We're talking about Adaro Energy that has created a whole unit focusing on solar power, right? We are even talking about our very own SOE, the oil giant Pertamina, creating Pertamina Power with a sole focus on how to increase renewable energy uptake, first within their operations and then branching, beyond Pertamina. So these are exciting times. Of course, this global development is being picked up by all of our major business players domestically and also by the government. We are now seeing the Indonesian government wholeheartedly embracing not only the net zero narrative, but also the coal phase out narrative and the fossil fuel energy subsidies removal in a very big way, understanding that this is the way going forward, that we need to go into the renewable energy future. However, barriers remain in Indonesia for renewable energy uptake. And despite of the fact that globally the cost of technology is declining, but in Indonesia, the technology remains costly for the fact that there are these barriers around finance and around technical aspects of transmission and distribution that still pegs the cost of solar power, for example, compared to any other market within the region. If you see in Vietnam auctions for solar power hitting 2 cents a kilowatt hour, in Indonesia, it's still more than double that because of all of these constraints. And this is because we lag behind in making the necessary investments in overhauling our own energy infrastructure, in, for example, modernizing the way our state utility operates.
The government is very welcoming to international cooperation, and it's perfect time, really, with the IA-CEPA being in place and Australia being very keen to work in the area of green economy and energy transition. You've worked in industry both in Australia and Indonesia. Are you excited about what lies ahead?
Very excited, because for the longest time, we've been saying that there's so many things that these two countries can learn from each other, right? Promote together in terms of innovation, not just in technology, but also in institutions, right? How do we govern energy transition, for instance? And also in terms of the social part of it, right? How do we ensure a better uptake socially of certain community level technologies, etc.? These two countries share a lot of similarities, but these two countries also have vast differences at the same time. When it comes to certain technologies like solar power, there are certainly so many similarities between Indonesia and Australia in that both countries have high irradiation levels, right? And so both countries have high potential for solar power. But in terms of the power sector market, the way the Australian power sector is designed is so different from the way the Indonesian power sector is run. And so there can be a lot of exchange there. There can be a lot of learnings, that we had from these two countries. But also, I have to mention here in terms of how to transition out of coal, because both countries are major coal producer and exporter. And this is a part of the puzzle that many of us still haven't figured out, right? I mean, we have to face the economic reality that at the moment, despite of the declining global market, but both countries are still very much dependent on this one commodity as a source of government revenue, as an industry that employs many people. So we both, Indonesia and Australia, have to figure out how to actually get out of the coal economy in a way where we can ensure safe landing for everyone involved, not just businesses, not just government entities, but also the people who are at the moment dependent on these industries. So a just transition mechanism, I think, needs to be part of the cooperation where both countries sit down and figure out how to do this in a way that is just, equitable, and make sure that there's safe landing for everyone.
Adhityani, thank you for being on the Katalis Podcast.
And we are fully committed that the additional capacity is mostly coming from the renewable energy. And how PLN is going to do it? For one, sure, PLN is not going to do it alone. We're going to do this through collaborations in terms of technology, investment, policy. So here we are proudly to announce that we are open for new investment starting today until in the long future to ensure the transition is going to run very smooth.
That was Darmawan Prasojo, President Director of Indonesia's State Electricity Company, PLN, reiterating the company's goal to start phasing out fossil fuel plants in 2025. The growth of new and renewable energy in Indonesia is being supported by policies to reduce and restrict fossil fuel utilization. The government of Indonesia is also throwing its support behind the development of infrastructure for interconnections and transmission, as well as smart grid electricity, and most currently by tapping into the electric vehicle ecosystem. Something Indonesia and Australia have in common is that the people in both countries are passionate about tackling climate change. A recent survey by Indikator and Yayasan Indonesia Cerah shows 82% of Indonesian voters aged 17 to 35 care about the issue of climate change. In Australia, a May 2021 polling by the Lowy Institute shows 6 in 10 Australians say global warming is a serious and pressing problem. Relatedly, high on the agenda of bilateral cooperation is the issue of green economy. In what practical ways is this potential going to materialize? We'll be speaking with Professor Kenneth Baldwin from the Australian National University. Professor Baldwin is an energy transition innovator and the director of the ANU Grand Challenge, Zero Carbon Energy for the Asia Pacific. Professor Baldwin, thank you so much for joining us on the Katalis Podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
In terms of renewable energy, where Indonesia is today is somewhere Australia has been perhaps a decade earlier. So the question many would like to ask now is, how do we enable an effective and efficient energy transition?
Renewable energy is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Last year, internationally, solar and wind was installed more than any other form of energy combined, including all of fossil fuels and all of nuclear. So this is an increasing trend. And the way to take advantage of this is really to open up opportunities for the private sector to invest in utility generation of renewables, and for small scale solar to contribute to energy generation for households and businesses. And governments have a role to play in this energy transition. For example, the reverse auction contracts for difference that was pioneered in Australia and adopted in countries like India allow an efficient process for investment in new electricity generation that provides opportunities for low-cost renewables, particularly solar, to compete with other generation systems. So government intervention in the energy markets to open it up and make it more competitive is one way of achieving an effective and efficient energy transition that then allows the private sector to operate within the market and move things forward.
Green economy is a popular topic these days in the bilateral sphere. In what practical ways can Australia help promote innovative solutions for green economy in Indonesia?
Well, first of all, there is a lot of research that is undertaken in Australia in the green economy, and in particular in the energy sector. So we have more than a dozen universities with energy institutes operating under the umbrella of the Energy Research Institute's Council for Australia, which contribute innovative solutions for the green economy. But Australia also has a role as a supplier of raw materials, for example, lithium for batteries, and is also a market for electric vehicles. So in terms of the relationship with Indonesia, we can collaborate on all different fronts, research, supply chains, demand for particular products. And we also have experience, for example, in solar installation. Companies like 5B have been developing new manufacturing systems for rolling out solar panels at enormous scale for utility generation. So the benefits can be in both directions.
You mentioned critical minerals for EV. As we know, Indonesia is building a regional hub for electric vehicle ecosystem, which entails expanding its downstream mineral processing to support the production of batteries. We also know that storage, along with generation, are big components of renewable energy. From a commercial standpoint, what is the potential you see there, and in what ways would collaborations with Australia, being a market leader, be compatible?
Yes, that's right. Battery storage will play an increasingly important role, not just for electric vehicles, but also for utility scale storage. We've seen the effectiveness of the massive Tesla battery system in South Australia, not only to store energy for when renewables aren't generating, but also for frequency and voltage control because of their fast response times. And indeed, Victoria is planning an even larger battery system, so Australia could end up being a major market for Indonesian battery production. And in the other direction, collaboration on battery research might well assist in making batteries cheaper, more reliable, longer lasting. And there's also a role, I think, for the two countries to participate in developing demand for batteries. And Australia, I think, has an enormous prospect for harnessing its renewable energy resources, and batteries will play a role in storing that energy for times when renewables aren't operating. The same is true as in Indonesia. Indonesia is part of the Sun Belt, so it will also have a large market for battery storage when solar is rolled out at increasingly larger scales.
Professor, your research focuses on renewable energy issues in the Asia-Pacific. What are some trends you have identified among emerging economies in the region?
We're seeing an increasing level of adoption of renewables in the Asia-Pacific, and also the introduction of government incentives for their adoption. For example, in India, the reverse auction system that was pioneered here in Australia is a case in point. And in Vietnam, the recent solar feed-in tariff subsidies are just two examples of the ways in which governments have identified new policies to accelerate the adoption of renewables. And what's happened is this has accelerated the natural trend for cheap renewable energy to be adopted to replace aging and more expensive, in most countries, fossil fuel generation. So it plays a significant role in the energy transition process.
Increasing availability of energy sources leads to an increase of vulnerability to cyber threats, with energy being more interconnected than ever. What are some things to be considered?
Yes, this is an interesting consideration because as we move forward with a more disseminated energy system, we will be looking at an energy future that resembles, if you like, Internet of Energy. So in other words, there will be disseminated generation systems such as rooftop solar, storage systems in households and electric vehicle batteries, and also demand response at the household level, playing a big role in the energy system alongside large-scale utility and industrial systems. So, of course, this will provide even more sources of entry for cyber attack. And indeed, your fridge could be connected through your household energy management system to the electricity provider, and that fridge could be the weak point in the system. However, smart software and technology protection can help prevent cyber attack, and this should really be a major focus of developing the new Internet of Energy. Besides, cyber attacks are going to happen anyway in systems even with centralized generation, as has happened, for example, in Ukraine. So it's arguable that taking out a large thermal generator in a centralized power system by cyber attack could be worse than taking out a small solar farm in a disseminated system. Indeed, the Internet of Energy may well be more robust because of the multiplicity of nodes and the multiplicity redundancy in its interconnected pathways, just like the internet is a robust system.
Moving to a greener economy is not just a good idea for the environment. It makes good economic sense too. In support of green economy objectives and energy transition, both Indonesia and Australia are recognizing and pursuing opportunities for collaboration. And that path has only just begun. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Katalis Podcast. Hope this has given you a lot to think about. We invite you to join in the conversation on social media and on our website at IA-CEPA-katalis.org. We'll see you in our next episode.